Hey everybody, I'm Tatsudoshi, and this topic is a little bit more difficult to place and kind of hard to rant about, but bear with me. Because for different generations, video games based on movies mean different things. For the 80s generation, myself included, we have a lot of half-ass, poorly put together movie games that either follow the movie way too much and cause the gameplay to suffer because of it, or the games that were so far from the movie that it barely could be considered a movie game. And even then, most of those games still sucked anyway and suffered from poor controls and all that nonsense. Batman on the NES was one of the very few good ones from this era, and it still sticks in people's minds as, it is good. It was good for its time, and it was a good movie game. To be honest, that's really all I can think about as good from that generation. There's a whole shitload of horrible ones that have nothing to do with the movies they were about, but let's move on. In the early 90s generation, things changed. While movie games were very poor and hardly ever got things right in the 80s, the 90s had quite a few good ones, and well put together ones at that. Aladdin had 3 totally different versions based on the Disney movie, and all 3 were pretty fun. But for every Aladdin in terms of quality, there were still 10 Toy Story in terms of quality. Now, if you haven't played any of the Toy Story games, go do yourself a favor and don't. Now, the 90s generation did have a leg up on the 80s counterpart in this respect. They had the ability to capture things graphically from what people remembered from the movie. So you can say, oh hey, that is that character, that is that monster. This, however, did not fix the what the fuck am I supposed to do, why the fuck is this game so goddamn hard, and what the fuck is going on, who programmed this piece of shit? Remarks from pretty much everybody when it came to general movie games market. When we get to the first generation of 3D game consoles, the hopes were high for finally getting a brand new world of things. No more pixels, we'd have polygons. And with that came the fact that we'd see a whole new plethora of movie games. I'll be honest, by this point, I had learned my lesson that movie games were to be avoided. However, I was still unfortunate enough to fall in the trap of 2 games in particular, Independence Day and The Fifth Element. Both movies I enjoyed when I was younger, and both games continued the tradition of shitty, poor quality, lackluster, broken movie games that barely had anything to do with the movie in the first place. If you guys have any personal horror stories of things based in the N64, PSX, Sega Saturn era of movie games, I'd love to see your horror stories in the comments because my knowledge from this generation of movie games is fairly limited. Onward! The second generation of 3D consoles suffered from far worse movie title tie-ins, spin-offs from my memory, and to be honest, this is where my real hatred of movie games came from. With such amazing gems as Enter the Matrix, Path of Neo, Cat in the Hat, Finding Nemo, Stuart Little, The Lord of the Rings entire fucking catalog, Cars, Reservoir Dogs, Scarface, and more that I don't even care to talk about, this generation had more retards in it than the average public school. I'll point my finger at the black sheep of the list that I just mentioned, just to prove a point. How the fuck do you make a game based off of Reservoir Dogs? Long story short, you fucking don't. This generation and future generations benefit from developers and studios actually having a little bit more money and or care for their product. So we end up with something at the very least playable. Mostly what we've been getting so far as movie games are either tie-ins, sequels, or prequels to the film, giving a pre- or post-narrative to the story. This isn't bad, but with the potential and ease of making at least a decent game, things like Iron Man 2 are just goddamn unacceptable.